The knife slipped from my trembling fingers, clattering against the stainless steel counter, as I stared at the cookbook in the bookstore window. There, on the glossy cover under the title, Sofia's Kitchen, Heritage Recipes Reimagined, was my grandmother's handwriting, her secret tomato sauce recipe that I'd watched her hide in our family Bible for 60 years. My daughter-in-law stood inside the store, radiant in her chef's whites, signing copies for a line that stretched around the block while I stood frozen on the sidewalk in my grocery store cashier's uniform. 23 years. I'd believed those recipes were buried with Nana Elena in that small cemetery outside Chicago, but there they were. My family's culinary soul being sold for $34.95, while Sofia Martinez smiled like she'd inherited magic instead of committing the perfect betrayal. Comment your location and subscribe to stay connected. Time to dive into the story. Let me tell you how I ended up watching my own daughter-in-law become a celebrity. Chef using recipes that had been passed down through 5 generations of women who never wrote them down for anyone outside the family. Because sometimes life doesn't just kick you when you're down. It serves your stolen heritage to strangers on a silver platter and charges them extra for the experience. 4 months earlier, I'd been Carmen Rodriguez, 62 years, old and invisible to everyone, except the customers who counted their change twice at my register and managers who reminded me that lunch breaks were exactly 30 minutes, not 31. My husband, Miguel, had been dead for 6 years, leaving me with credit card debt I couldn't afford and a house that needed repairs I couldn't make. My son, Julian, visited maybe 3 times a year with his wife, Sofia, just long enough to remind me how different their lives were from mine. "Mom, you could have done so much more," Julian would say, glancing around my cramped apartment with that expression, children reserved for parents who disappointed them. Nana Elena always said you had natural talent in the kitchen. You just never pursued it. He wasn't wrong about the talent part. Once upon a time, Carmen Rodriguez had been the girl everyone wanted to cook for their weddings and quinceañeras. I'd learned everything from Nana Elena, my grandmother who'd brought her culinary secrets from a small village in Oaxaca and guarded them like treasure. She'd taught me to make mole that took 3 days and tasted like heaven, tamales that made people cry with nostalgia, and a tomato sauce so perfect that people would beg for the recipe and Nana would just smile and say, "It's in the hands, mija. You can't write down what the hands know." Then Miguel happened. Sweet, hard-working Miguel with his construction job and dreams of giving me stability. Marriage at 24, Julian at 26, and suddenly cooking became something I did to feed my family, not to express my soul. The dream of opening my own restaurant got packed away in a box marked "Someday" right next to my other abandoned ambitions. After Miguel died, I'd tried to remember who I used to be. But grief has a way of erasing everything except survival. The restaurant industry required energy I didn't have, startup money I'd never possess, and confidence that had been buried under 6 years of just making it through each day. When Nana Elena died 3 years ago at 94, I'd been the one to sort through her belongings. My mother had died young, making me the keeper of family traditions I didn't have the strength to maintain. I'd found Nana's handwritten recipes tucked into the family Bible, dozens of them written in her careful Spanish script with notes in the margins about technique and timing and the secret ingredients that made each dish transcend ordinary food. I'd cried reading them, remembering afternoons in her kitchen, learning to judge mole consistency by how it coated a wooden spoon, understanding that the best food required patience and love in equal measure. Those recipes represented 5 generations of women cooking their way through poverty and immigration and loss, turning ordinary ingredients into extraordinary meals through sheer force of will and accumulated wisdom. I'd kept the Bible with me always, even through 2 apartment moves after selling the house. It was the only inheritance that mattered. Not money, but knowledge. The kind of knowledge that connected me to women I'd never meet, grandmothers and great-grandmothers whose hands had shaped the same masa, stirred the same sauces, and whispered the same prayers over simmering pots. When Julian mentioned that Sofia had gotten a job as a sous chef at Marcella's, an upscale restaurant downtown, I'd felt a flutter of something that might have been pride. At least someone in the family was making it in the culinary world, even if it wasn't me. "Sofia's really talented, Mom," Julian had said during his last visit. "Chef Marcella thinks she has what it takes to go far, maybe even open her own place someday." I'd smiled and nodded, playing the supportive mother-in-law role I'd perfected over the years. What else was I going to say? That watching someone else live my abandoned dreams made me feel like I was drowning in regret? When the call came from Marcella's general manager offering me a job hosting in their private dining room, I'd been too surprised to say no. "Sofia had recommended me," she said. "Thought I might enjoy being around food again, seeing real culinary artistry in action." "It's not kitchen work," Rachel had explained in her efficient, professional voice. "Just greeting private party guests, managing reservations, ensuring they have everything they need. But Sofia mentioned your culinary background, and we prefer hosts who appreciate what we're creating." The pay was better than the grocery store, and honestly, I needed the money. Social Security barely covered rent, so I'd said yes, bought a simple black dress that made me look professional instead of poor, and showed up for my first shift 3 weeks ago. Marcella's was everything I dreamed of in my youth. An open kitchen where you could watch chefs work like artists, ingredients sourced from local farms and specialty importers, a wine list that read like poetry. Walking through that space with a reservation book, I felt like a ghost visiting her own funeral, seeing everything I might have built if I'd made different choices. Sofia had been polite but distant during my first few shifts, acknowledging me with brief smiles while she worked the line with focused intensity. She looked perfect in this environment, confident, skilled, speaking the language of haute cuisine with easy fluency. Everything I might have been if I hadn't chosen stability over ambition. But tonight was special. Tonight was a private tasting event where Marcella's would showcase dishes from their new Heritage Reimagined menu. Classic recipes from various cultures, elevated with modern technique and presentation. Sofia had been instrumental in developing the menu, according to the promotional materials I'd been given to study. I'd been setting tables in the private dining room when I overheard Sofia talking to Chef Marcella about the centerpiece dish of the evening. "The tomato sauce is the foundation," Sofia was saying. "It's a traditional Oaxacan recipe that's been in my family for generations. The secret is the combination of dried chilies and the way you toast the tomatoes before blending. It creates this incredible depth of flavor." My hands had frozen on the wine glass I was placing. Oaxacan tomato sauce, family recipe for generations. I'd walked into the kitchen on the pretense of checking on glassware, positioning myself where I could see the prep station. There, in a large pot, was sauce that looked exactly like Nana Elena's. The color, the consistency, even the way it moved when Sofia stirred it. "Can I taste it?" Chef Marcella had asked. Of course. Sofia had ladled a small amount onto a spoon. Marcella had closed her eyes as she tasted, her face transforming with pleasure. "Sofia, this is extraordinary. The complexity, the balance, it's rustic but refined at the same time. Your grandmother must have been an incredible cook." "She was," Sofia had said smoothly. "She taught me everything about respecting ingredients and traditional techniques." Her grandmother, Sofia's grandmother, had been a Presbyterian from Minnesota who'd made tuna casserole and Jell-O salad. I knew because I'd met her at the wedding. I'd stood there in the kitchen doorway, telling myself I was wrong, mistaken. Maybe Sofia had learned Oaxacan cooking from someone else. Maybe this was coincidence. But then I'd seen it. On the prep station, partially hidden under a kitchen towel, was a piece of paper covered in familiar handwriting. Nana Elena's handwriting, with her specific notes about toasting tomatoes until they sang and adding the piloncillo at just the right moment. My recipe, my family's recipe, being prepared by Sofia, who was claiming it came from her own heritage. The tasting event had been a triumph. 20 wealthy food enthusiasts paying $300 per person to experience Sofia's reimagined heritage dishes. The tomato sauce, served over hand-rolled pasta with micro basil and aged parmesan, had been the undisputed star of the evening. "This sauce," one woman had gushed, "it tastes like memory itself, like everything good about childhood kitchens." Sofia had beamed, accepting compliments with practiced humility. "It's all about honoring the wisdom of the women who came before us," she'd said. "These recipes are living history." Living history that she'd stolen from my grandmother's Bible. I'd served wine with hands that barely trembled, watching Sofia build her reputation on the foundation of my family's culinary legacy. On the outside, I was invisible Carmen Rodriguez in her simple black dress. On the inside, I was screaming. After the event ended and guests filtered out into the night, I'd approached Sofia in the kitchen where she was cleaning her station. "That tomato sauce was incredible," I'd said carefully, "very similar to something my Nana Elena used to make." Sofia had glanced up, her expression unreadable. "Really? Oaxacan cuisine has a lot of common techniques. Maybe your grandmother's recipe was from the same regional tradition as mine." "Maybe," I'd agreed. "Where exactly did your grandmother's family come from in Oaxaca?" The pause had been just a fraction too long. "I'd have to ask my mother," Sofia had said. "She knows more about the family history than I do." I'd nodded and left, but the seed of certainty had already taken root. Sofia was lying. And somewhere in my apartment, hidden in Nana Elena's Bible, was the proof. I'd driven home in the dark, my mind clearer than it had been in years. By the time I reached my apartment, I had a plan. In my bedroom closet, behind winter coats and shoe boxes, was the family Bible where Nana Elena had kept her recipes. I pulled it out with hands that shook with rage instead of age. There, tucked between Exodus and Leviticus, were dozens of recipe cards in Nana's handwriting. But something was wrong. I flipped through them frantically, counting. The tomato sauce recipe was missing. So was her mole negro, and her tamale filling, and at least 6 other recipes I distinctly remembered seeing when I'd first gone through the Bible after Nana's death. I sat on my bedroom floor, surrounded by scattered recipe cards, and remembered. 2 years ago, just after she and Julian got married, Sofia had asked to borrow the Bible. She'd said something about wanting to research family history, about feeling disconnected from her own heritage and being fascinated by ours. I'd let her keep it for 3 weeks, long enough to photograph every recipe, long enough to steal 5 generations of culinary wisdom and plan how to use it. The rage that filled me then was pure and clean, the kind that burns away everything except purpose. Sofia Martinez had made a very expensive mistake. She'd assumed that Carmen Rodriguez, the broken woman in the hostess uniform, was the same person as the girl who'd once dreamed of cooking her way to something better. Time to remind her exactly who she'd decided to rob. I didn't go to work the next day. Instead, I called in sick for the first time since starting at Marcella's and spent the morning documenting everything I could remember about Nana Elena's recipes. The cards that remained in the Bible, the missing ones I could recall, even the stories Nana had told about learning each dish from her own mother and grandmother. By noon, I had a list of 9 missing recipes and detailed notes about the specific techniques and secret ingredients that made each one unique. But I needed more than memories. I needed proof. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Rosa Delgado, Nana Elena's oldest friend. Rosa was 91 now, living in a nursing home on the south side, but her mind was sharp as ever. If anyone could corroborate my family's recipes, it was Rosa, who'd spent 60 years cooking alongside Nana Elena at church events and family celebrations. She answered on the third ring, her voice warm with surprise. "Carmen? Mija, what a wonderful surprise. How are you?" "Rosa, I need your help with something important. Do you remember Nana Elena's recipes, the ones she kept secret?" "Of course. Your grandmother was very particular about those recipes. Wouldn't share them with anyone outside the family. Said they were heritage, not just food." My heart started pounding. "Rosa, if you saw those recipes being used by someone else, someone claiming they came from their own family, would you recognize them?" A long pause. "Carmen, what's happened?" I told her everything. Sofia, the borrowed Bible, the missing recipe cards, the tomato sauce at Marcella's. Rosa listened without interrupting, making occasional sounds that suggested she was taking notes. "That girl," Rosa said finally, her voice sharp with anger, "she stole your grandmother's legacy. Carmen, this is serious. Those recipes represent generations of knowledge." "I know. That's why I need your help. Would you be willing to testify about Nana's recipes if this goes legal?" "Legal? Mia, are you talking about suing your son's wife?" The question hit me like cold water. Suing Sofia meant destroying Julian's marriage, tearing apart what was left of my family, becoming the difficult mother-in-law who couldn't let things go. "I'm talking about protecting what Nana Elena left us," I said firmly. "She trusted me to be the keeper of family traditions. I can't let someone steal them and profit from our heritage." "Then yes," Rosa said without hesitation, "I'll testify. Your grandmother would want you to fight for this." After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the family Bible and the scattered recipe cards. I needed more than Rosa's testimony. I needed documentation, expert analysis, something that would hold up if this escalated. I made my second call to Dr. Maria Santos, a food historian at the university who'd done research on Mexican culinary traditions. I'd met her years ago at a community event where Nana Elena had been demonstrating traditional cooking techniques. Maria had been fascinated by Nana's knowledge and had even interviewed her for a research project about immigrant food traditions. "Carmen Rodriguez," Maria said when she answered. "I was just thinking about your grandmother last week. I'm developing a course on intergenerational culinary knowledge, and Elena's interview is one of my primary sources. Maria, I need your professional help. Someone has stolen my grandmother's recipes and is using them to build a career." "Stolen? How?" I explained the situation. Sofia, the Bible, the missing recipes, the dishes at Marcella's. Maria listened with the focused attention of someone whose academic interests had suddenly become personally relevant. "Carmen, this is complicated," she said carefully. "Recipes themselves can't be copyrighted. But the specific written instructions, the unique combinations, the cultural context, those can be protected as intellectual property under certain circumstances." "What circumstances?" "If you can prove that the recipes are uniquely identified with your family, that they represent specific cultural knowledge passed down through generations, and that Sofia misrepresented their origin, you might have a case for fraud or cultural appropriation." "I have my grandmother's original recipe cards. Well, most of them." "That's good, but you'll also need testimony from people who can verify that these recipes were exclusive to your family. Witnesses who saw your grandmother cooking these specific dishes using these specific techniques." "I have Rosa Delgado. She cooked with Nana for 60 years. "Perfect. And Carmen, there's something else you should consider. If Sofia is using these recipes commercially, claiming they're from her own heritage, she's not just stealing intellectual property. She's committing cultural fraud. That could have serious professional consequences for her career." After hanging up, I felt the weight of what I was considering. This wasn't just about getting my recipes back. This was about publicly exposing Sofia's theft, potentially destroying her culinary career, and almost certainly ending Julian's marriage. But what was the alternative? Letting Sofia build an empire on my grandmother's legacy while I went back to hosting dinner parties and pretending I didn't know I'd been robbed? My phone buzzed with a text from Julian. Mom, Sofia told me you seemed interested in her tomato sauce last night. She'd be happy to teach you how to make it if you want to learn some professional techniques. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, that would be lovely. Maybe she could tell me where her grandmother learned to make it so authentically. Because if Sofia wanted to play the role of generous mentor, teaching me recipes that had belonged to my family for 5 generations, I was about to teach her something she'd never learned in culinary school. Starting with the most important lesson, always know exactly who you're stealing from. Sofia's invitation to her home kitchen came 3 days later, delivered with the warm enthusiasm of someone who genuinely believed they were doing a kindness. Carmen, I'd love to have you over. Sunday afternoon? We can make the sauce together, and I'll show you the techniques that really make it special. I arrived at their pristine townhouse in a neighborhood I could never afford, carrying a bottle of wine I'd carefully selected and the family Bible hidden in my oversized purse. Julian was away at a conference Sofia had mentioned. Just us girls, learning and bonding. Sofia's kitchen was everything mine wasn't. Marble countertops, professional-grade appliances, a bookshelf filled with cookbooks from famous chefs. On the windowsill sat fresh herbs in expensive ceramic pots. On the stove, a pot was already warming. I started the tomatoes roasting, Sofia said, tying on an apron that read, Heritage Kitchen, in stylized script. That's really the key to the depth of flavor, getting that char just right. I watched as she worked, noting every detail. The way she turned the tomatoes, the specific moment she added the garlic, the combination of dried chilies she was toasting in a separate pan. It was precisely how Nana Elena had taught me. Your grandmother must have been an incredible cook, I said carefully, learning these techniques at such a young age. Sofia's hands paused for just a moment before continuing. She was amazing, very particular about methods, always said the old ways were the best ways. What was her name, your grandmother? Her name? Sofia repeated, buying time. Margaret Olsen. That's interesting. Olsen is Norwegian, isn't it? Did she learn Oaxacan cooking from someone in Mexico? She married a Mexican man, my grandfather. He taught her his family's recipes before he died. The lies were getting more elaborate. I pulled out my phone and showed her a photo I'd found in the Bible. Nana Elena in her kitchen, surrounded by grandchildren, dated 1998. Julian was clearly visible, about 15 years old. This is my Nana Elena, I said. She taught me this exact sauce in that kitchen. Same techniques, same proportions, same secret ingredients. Sofia's face had gone pale. Carmen, I think there's been a misunderstanding. No misunderstanding. You borrowed the family Bible 2 years ago, remember? Said you wanted to research family history. You kept it for 3 weeks. I was just interested in... You photographed my grandmother's recipes. The ones she spent her entire life protecting. The ones she only shared with family. Then you stole them and claimed they were your own heritage. Sofia set down her wooden spoon with careful precision. Carmen, you need to understand. Those recipes were going to waste with you. You weren't doing anything with them. I'm making them matter, making them known. I'm honoring them. By lying about where they came from? By claiming my family's heritage as your own? Heritage belongs to everyone. These recipes shouldn't be locked away in some Bible, forgotten. They should be shared, celebrated, elevated. They should be shared by the family they belong to, I said, my voice rising. Not stolen by someone who wanted a shortcut to culinary success. Sofia's mask of polite concern finally cracked, revealing the calculation underneath. You can't prove anything. Recipes can't be copyrighted. And even if you could prove they came from your grandmother, so what? I've adapted them, elevated them, made them into something more than home cooking. More than home cooking? I repeated, anger making my voice shake. These recipes represent 5 generations of women surviving poverty and immigration by feeding their families with love and skill. You've turned that into a commodity. I've turned it into art, Sofia shot back, something your grandmother never had the sophistication to do. The insult to Nana Elena cleared away any remaining guilt about what I was about to do. I pulled the family Bible from my purse and opened it to show the remaining recipe cards. These are originals in my grandmother's handwriting. Rosa Delgado, who cooked with my grandmother for 60 years, is prepared to testify that these recipes were exclusive to our family. Dr. Maria Santos, a food historian, has recorded interviews with Nana Elena discussing these exact recipes and their family history. And I have photographs documenting which recipes were in this Bible before you borrowed it and which ones went missing afterward. Sofia stared at the Bible, then at me, her expression shifting from anger to calculation. What do you want? I want credit. Every dish you've made using my grandmother's recipes needs to be attributed correctly. The cookbook you're planning needs to acknowledge where these recipes really came from. And any future use of my family's culinary heritage requires my explicit permission. That would destroy my career, Sofia said flatly. Everything I've built in the past 2 years is based on these recipes. If I admit they're not from my family heritage, I look like a fraud. You are a fraud. Carmen, be reasonable. We can work something out. I'll pay you for the recipes, give you a percentage of the cookbook proceeds. I don't want your money. I want my grandmother's legacy protected and honored correctly. Sofia's expression hardened. And if I refuse? Then I take everything I have to Chef Marcella, to the restaurant industry press, to anyone who will listen. I expose you as someone who built their career on stolen cultural heritage, and then we see how sophisticated your career looks when everyone knows the truth. We stood on opposite sides of her expensive kitchen, the pot of stolen sauce simmering between us like evidence. You would destroy your son's marriage over some old recipes? Sofia asked. You destroyed it when you decided to steal from his family. I'm just making sure everyone knows what really happened. Sofia's phone buzzed on the counter, a reminder notification. Cookbook photo shoot Monday 10 a.m. flashed across the screen. She saw me notice it. Carmen, you have until tomorrow night to decide. Either we work out a financial arrangement, or I tell Julian that you've been harassing me, making wild accusations, probably suffering from early dementia or grief-related delusions. Who do you think he'll believe? His successful wife or his struggling mother? I picked up my purse and the Bible, my hands remarkably steady. I think he'll believe the evidence, but I guess we'll find out. Driving home, I felt lighter than I had in years. Sofia thought she'd won by threatening to turn Julian against me. She'd assumed I needed my son's approval more than I needed my grandmother's legacy protected. She'd made a mistake. Because Carmen Rodriguez, invisible hostess and grieving widow, was done choosing other people's comfort over her own truth. Tomorrow, I'd call Chef Marcella and request a meeting. Then I'd contact the food writers who'd been covering Sofia's rising career. Because Sofia Martinez was about to learn that some recipes come with consequences and some shortcuts lead directly to disaster. Chef Marcella Russo's office at the restaurant was smaller than I'd expected, but every inch spoke of serious accomplishment. Culinary awards, framed reviews from prestigious publications, photographs of her with famous chefs. She listened to my story with the focused attention of someone assessing a complex recipe, occasionally taking notes in a leather-bound journal. Let me make sure I understand, she said after I'd finished explaining everything. Sofia has been using recipes from your grandmother's collection, claiming they're from her own family heritage, and building her career on this misrepresentation. Yes. And you have documentation? Original recipe cards in your grandmother's handwriting? I spread the contents of the Bible across her desk. Recipe cards, photographs of Nana Elena cooking, even the page where Nana had written the date she'd first learned each recipe from her own grandmother in 1952. Marcella studied everything with the careful precision she probably applied to plating. Carmen, If this is true, Sofia has violated both professional ethics and my personal trust. I built the Heritage Reimagined menu specifically because I believed Sofia was sharing authentic family traditions. If she's been lying about the provenance of these recipes, she borrowed my family Bible 2 years ago and photographed my grandmother's recipes. Then she claimed they came from her own grandmother. Marcela's expression had gone from concerned to actively angry. Who else knows about this? Rosa Delgado, who cooked with my grandmother for 60 years. Dr. Maria Santos, a food historian who interviewed my grandmother about these exact recipes. And now you. I need to verify this independently, Marcela said. But Carmen, if your allegations are accurate, Sofia won't just lose her position here. This could end her career in this city. The culinary community takes authenticity seriously. She should have thought about that before stealing from my family. Marcela made several phone calls while I waited, speaking in low tones to people whose names I recognized from restaurant industry publications. When she finally hung up, her expression was grave. I've spoken to 3 food writers who've been covering Sofia's career. They're all interested in investigating your claims. One of them, Daniel Park from the Tribune, has apparently been researching Sofia's background and found some inconsistencies in her personal history that he couldn't quite explain. What kind of inconsistencies? According to his research, Sofia's grandmother died when she was 3 years old. Yet Sofia has given multiple interviews describing cooking with her grandmother well into her teenage years. The lies ran deeper than I'd realized. Sofia hadn't just stolen recipes. She'd invented an entire fictional grandmother to justify possessing culinary knowledge she had no right to claim. There's something else you should know, Marcela continued. Sofia submitted a proposal for a cookbook deal last month. The publisher paid a significant advance based on her claim that these were authentic family recipes from her Mexican heritage. If it comes out that she misrepresented the source of these recipes, she'll likely face legal action from the publisher for fraud. How significant of an advance? $150,000. I thought about my 6 years of financial struggle after Miguel's death, the credit card debt that still kept me awake at night, the apartment I could barely afford. Sofia had received $150,000 for recipes that weren't hers while I hosted dinner parties for tips. Chef Marcela, I want to be clear about something. I'm not doing this for money. I'm doing it because my grandmother trusted me to protect our family's culinary legacy. But I also think Sofia needs to face real consequences for what she's done. She will, Marcela said firmly. But Carmen, you need to prepare yourself. Your son is married to this woman. When this story breaks, and it will break, it's going to impact your family in ways you may not have considered. I thought about Julian, about the excited phone calls describing Sofia's success, about his pride in having a wife who was making a name for herself in competitive culinary world. All of it built on stolen foundations. My son deserves to know who he married, I said quietly, even if it hurts him to learn the truth. That evening, Daniel Park from the Tribune called. He wanted to meet the next day to review my documentation and interview Rosa Delgado. He also wanted to see if I could recreate any of Nana Elena's recipes to demonstrate my own culinary knowledge. Mrs. Rodriguez, I've been following Sofia Martinez's career for a year, Daniel explained. Her rise was unusually rapid, and her techniques seemed remarkably sophisticated for someone her age and experience level. When you factor in the inconsistencies about her family history, your allegations start to make a lot of sense. Can you prove that recipes can't just suddenly appear? I asked. Not definitively, but I can show a pattern of misrepresentation and raise serious questions about the authenticity of her claimed heritage. In the culinary world, reputation is everything. Even unproven allegations of cultural appropriation and fraud can be career-ending. After hanging up, I pulled out Nana Elena's recipes and read through them slowly, remembering her hands showing me each technique, her voice explaining why certain steps mattered, her stories about learning these same recipes from her own grandmother in Oaxaca. These weren't just instructions for making food. They were connections to women I'd never met, threads linking me to a heritage that had survived poverty and displacement and loss. Sofia had treated them like ingredients she could borrow and recombine into something trendy. My phone rang, Julian calling from his conference. His voice was tight with stress. "Mom, what the hell is going on? Sofia just called me crying, saying you're trying to destroy her career with false accusations about recipes." "Not false accusations, true ones. She said you're claiming her tomato sauce recipe came from Nana Elena, but that's ridiculous. Oaxacan cooking has common techniques." "Julian, Sofia borrowed the family Bible 2 years ago. When she returned it, 9 of Nana's recipes were missing, including the tomato sauce recipe she's been claiming came from her own grandmother." Silence on the other end of the line. "Mom, are you absolutely sure about this?" "I have the original recipe cards with Nana's handwriting. I have witnesses who can verify these recipes were exclusive to our family. I have a food historian who interviewed Nana about these specific recipes. And I have documentation showing which recipes were in the Bible before Sofia borrowed it." "Jesus Christ!" Julian's voice cracked. "Mom, why didn't you tell me this before confronting her?" "Because I wanted to be absolutely certain before I accused your wife of theft. Now I'm certain." "What happens now?" "Now Sofia has to choose whether to admit what she's done and make it right, or I take everything I have public and let the restaurant industry decide what they think of a chef who built her career on stolen heritage." Julian was quiet for a long moment. "I need to come home. This conversation needs to happen in person." After hanging up, I sat in my quiet apartment and thought about family loyalty and truth. Part of me wanted to protect Julian from this pain, to find a way to handle this that didn't destroy his marriage. But a larger part of me knew that some betrayals needed to be exposed, even when exposure hurt everyone involved. Sofia had stolen from my family while pretending to be part of it. That kind of calculated deception couldn't be overlooked just because confronting it was uncomfortable. Tomorrow, I'd meet with Daniel Park and show him everything. Then I'd let the truth do what truth does best, reveal exactly who people really are when no one's watching. The Tribune article appeared online 3 days later at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. The headline was devastating in its simplicity. "Rising chefs' heritage recipes may have different heritage entirely. Carmen Rodriguez claims Sofia Martinez built career on stolen family recipes." Daniel Park had done thorough work. The article included photographs of Nana Elena's original recipe cards, testimony from Rosa Delgado about the exclusivity of our family recipes, analysis from Dr. Maria Santos about cultural appropriation in the culinary world, and most damning, documentation showing that Sofia's claimed Mexican grandmother had actually been Margaret Olson, a Norwegian-American woman from Minnesota who died when Sofia was 3 years old. By noon, the story had been picked up by every major food publication in the country. By evening, it was trending on social media with hashtags like Nancha stolen recipes and Concha cultural appropriation. My phone had been ringing nonstop, news outlets wanting interviews, lawyers offering to represent me, even a few literary agents suggesting I write my own cookbook to set the record straight. I'd turned most of them away, giving only one interview to Daniel Park for a follow-up story about the emotional impact of having your family heritage stolen. But the call that mattered most came from Julian at 3 p.m. His voice was hollow, emptied out. "Mom, I left her. I packed a bag this morning and moved into a hotel. I can't even look at her right now." "Julian, I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry. You were right. Sofia lied about everything. Her grandmother, her heritage, where she learned to cook, all of it was calculated. She saw your recipes as an opportunity and took it without caring what it meant to our family." I heard him take a shaky breath. The worst part is that I helped her. When she borrowed the Bible, she told me it was for a project about immigration stories, and I encouraged you to let her keep it as long as she needed. I gave her the time to photograph everything and plan how to use it. You didn't know, honey. Neither did I. Not until I saw her using Nana's sauce at the restaurant. I should have known. There were signs, the way her cooking suddenly improved after we got married. How she started claiming techniques came from her family when I knew she'd struggled with basics in culinary school. I just didn't want to see it. That evening, I visited Julian at his hotel. He looked terrible, unshaven, exhausted, wearing the same clothes he'd probably slept in. The room was generic and impersonal, a temporary space for a life that had temporarily fallen apart. Chef Marcella fired Sofia this morning, he told me. The restaurant issued a statement distancing themselves from her and pulling all the heritage reimagined dishes from the menu. Her cookbook deal was canceled,